The year 121 began for me at Rome, in the steady presence of my father, Marcus Annius Verus. I remember Villa Garden most clearly. The world soft and unhurried around me, the days unfolding slowly. You need not follow every word that follows. Let your eyes close whenever they wish, and simply rest here with me. As the story unfolds, the light in those early mornings was a pale, gentle thing that slipped through the high windows and touched the mosaic floor with a quiet warmth. I was born into that house, a small arrival that changed nothing of the rhythm, yet everything of the heart. My mother, Domitia Lucilla, moved through the rooms with a grace that seemed to hold the air itself in place. She smelled of lavender and the cool stone of the courtyard, a scent that remains as clear in memory as the taste of water from a well. My grandfather sat in the corner, his hands resting on the arms of his chair, watching the dust motes dance in the shafts of afternoon light. He was a man of great dignity, and his silence spoke louder than any lecture could have. The days were filled with the soft scratch of a stylus on wax tablets and the low murmur of tutors explaining the world. I learned to read Latin before I understood the weight of the letters, tracing the shapes with a finger that felt too small for the task. The air inside the house held the aroma of dried ink and old parchment, a smell that clung to the woolen tunics and the wooden shelves. Outside, the wind moved gently through the alive trees planted in the courtyard, casting long, dancing shadows that stretched across the floor like slow, dark fingers. A bronze lamp burned steadily in the corner, its flame steady and golden, casting a warm glow over the scattered papers and open books. The silence of the room felt deep and comforting, broken only by the soft scratch of a stylus on wax or the distant shift of a guard on the stone floor. Dust motes drifted slowly through the light that entered from the high, narrow window, moving with a dreamlike slowness that invited a long, peaceful contemplation. The texture of the papyrus was rough under the fingertips, a tactile reminder of the labor involved in preserving thought. The walls were lined with shelves holding various scrolls, each representing a different voice from the past that I had studied. The room felt small and intimate, a sanctuary against the vastness of the empire and the noise of the world outside. The warmth of the fire in the hearth provided a gentle comfort that seeped into the bones of the weary child. Shadows stretched long across the floor, merging with the darkness of the night outside. As the sun began to set behind the distant hills, the heavy curtains drew together to keep the cool evening air at bay, while the fire crackled softly, a sound that seemed to hold the weight of history. This space held the calm of a mind seeking order in chaos, even before I knew what chaos truly was. The stillness of the room mirrored the inner peace I sought to maintain, a quiet center that would hold through the years to come. I remember the taste of the bread, warm and dense, and the sound of my mother's voice reading aloud in the evening. The lessons were not always easy, but they were always steady, like the rhythm of the tide. I learned to distinguish between what is within my control and what is not, a simple truth that would guide me through storms I had not yet seen. The bronze inkwell sat nearby, its surface tarnished by years of use and the damp climate of the frontier, though in those days it was only a tool for writing. The philosophical works I would later write were not yet known to the world, circulating only in the quiet corners of my own mind. They were a private guide for my own moral conduct, a way to balance power with humility. The The historical record confirms my role as a commander and a philosopher, though the two identities often seem at odds to those who look back. The Marcomannic Wars would come much later, a time of conflict along the Danube River, but in this moment there is only the quiet of the villa and the steady presence of my family. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of a potted olive tree that sat near the window, adding a gentle sound to the peaceful atmosphere. The room felt like a sanctuary where the mind could wander freely without the distractions of the world outside. It was a place where the young Marcus had spent many hours absorbing the lessons that would shape his character. The stillness of the room mirrored the inner peace he sought to cultivate through his studies. Every object in the space seemed to whisper of the enduring value of knowledge and the importance of a life well lived. The light slowly faded as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the wooden floorboards. The oil lamp was lit, and its warm glow filled the room with a soft, golden radiance. The scroll remained open, waiting for the next reader to continue the work of understanding the human condition. The room held the memory of quiet contemplation and the steady pursuit of wisdom that defined the early life of the future emperor. I was born into the house of the Anni, a family of ancient lineage, yet my earliest memories are not of grand halls, but of the quiet discipline of the home. The sun rose over the 7 hills of Rome, casting long shadows across the stone floors where I first learned to walk. My father, Marcus Annius Verus, died when I was but a child, leaving me under the care of my mother and my grandfather. It was in that house that I first learned the value of a life lived with purpose. My grandfather, also named Marcus, was a man of great dignity, and his example shaped my early understanding of duty. Live. He moved through the rooms with a steady grace, his hands often resting on the backs of chairs or the spines of books, grounding the air with his presence. As I grew, the Emperor Hadrian took notice of me, calling me Verissimus, the most truthful, a name that would carry me through the years. That title felt heavy on my tongue, a stone I had to carry before I knew its weight. My education was rigorous, guided by the finest minds of Rome. Diognetus, the painter, was my first tutor, teaching me to observe the world with clarity and to value the simple things over the ornate. Live. He showed me that the truth is often found in the unadorned. I remember the smell of his studio, a mix of charcoal dust and the sharp tang of fresh plaster. He did not speak much, but his eyes followed the light as it moved across the walls, teaching me to see the world as it was, not as I wished it to be. The light of a late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of a quiet study in Rome, illuminating dust motes that danced slowly in the still air. Leave. A large wooden desk stood in the center of the room, its surface worn smooth by the hands of many scholars who had worked there before. Upon the desk lay an open scroll of papyrus, its edges slightly frayed from years of careful handling and frequent reading. The ink on the page was dark and clear, recording thoughts on the nature of virtue and the fleeting nature of human life. Beside the scroll rested a small oil lamp, its flame steady and untroubled by any draught in the room. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with rows of clay tablets and leather bound volumes, each containing the wisdom of the ages. A single bronze statue of a philosopher stood in the corner, its expression serene and thoughtful as it gazed out toward the distant hills. The air smelled faintly of cedar wood and old paper, a scent that evoked a sense of calm and deep contemplation. Outside the window, the city moved on with its usual bustle, but within this room, time seemed to stand still. The silence was not empty, but full of the quiet presence of those who had sought truth in this very space. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of a potted olive tree that sat near the window, adding a gentle sound to the peaceful atmosphere. The room felt like a sanctuary where the mind could wander freely without the distractions of the world outside. It was a place where the young Marcus had spent many hours absorbing the lessons that would shape his character. The stillness of the room mirrored the inner peace he sought to cultivate through his studies. Every object in the space seemed to whisper of the enduring value of knowledge and the importance of a life well lived. The light slowly faded as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the wooden floorboards. The oil lamp was lit, and its warm glow filled the room with a soft, golden radiance. The scroll remained open, waiting for the next reader to continue, live the work of understanding the human condition live. The room held the memory of quiet contemplation and the steady pursuit of wisdom that defined the early life of the future emperor. Later, I studied under the Stoic teachers, learning to distinguish between what is within my control, live, and what belongs to the fickle winds of fate. I studied rhetoric and grammar under the guidance of renowned masters who shaped my literary voice. They taught me to construct arguments and to speak with clarity and force before large audiences in the forums. This training in rhetoric formed the foundation of my public life and my ability to govern effectively. Yet, as I matured, my interests shifted away from the art of speaking toward the deeper study of philosophy. I eventually abandoned the study of rhetoric in favor of the Stoic philosophy that would guide my entire life. The Emperor Antoninus Pius later invited the Greek Stoic philosopher Apollonius of Chalcedon to Rome. This scholar was appointed as a professor of philosophy within the imperial household to instruct the young Marcus. Apollonius taught with a stern intensity that demanded absolute honesty from his students. He did not coddle the spirit, but rather forged it in the fires of self-examination. I remember the way he would pause in his lecture, his gaze fixed on a point far beyond the walls of the room, as if seeing the invisible threads that bind all things together. The young prince absorbed the Stoic teachings of Aristo of Chios with a profound emotional intensity. In a letter to Fronto written between 145 and 147, I reported feeling intense joy and shame after reading Aristo of Chios. This internal conflict marked the beginning of my lifelong dedication to moral philosophy and self-examination. It was a strange feeling to be so moved by words written by a man long dead, yet that movement was the first true step toward wisdom. I My style evolved through a constant dialogue with the great Greek and Roman thinkers of antiquity. I read their works by the light of flickering candles, the wax dripping onto the stone floor, a small testament to the passage of time. The pages turned under my fingers, soft and dry, carrying the voices of the dead into the living world. I sought to understand the nature of the soul and the place of man within the vast cosmos. The lessons were not always easy to accept, but they were necessary for the burden I would one day carry. The foundation laid in those early years would support me when I faced the storms of war and the weight of the crown. I learned that the mind must be a fortress built not of stone, but of reason and acceptance. The chaos of the world could rage outside, but within there was a quiet center that could not be shaken. This was the gift of my education, a peace that no enemy could take away. The books on the shelves were my companions, their silent wisdom a constant guide through the changing seasons of my life. I walked among them in the quiet of the night, tracing the spines with my fingers, feeling the texture of leather and the weight of knowledge. Each volume held a world of its own, a universe of thought that expanded my own small existence. The journey from the quiet rooms of my childhood to the throne of the empire was paved with these lessons. They were the stones under my feet, steady and unyielding. The boy who was born in Rome would one day rule the vast territories of the empire with wisdom and justice. He prepared himself for the burdens of leadership through years of disciplined study and reflection. The air in the study was thick with the scent of ink and old paper, a perfume of the mind that never faded. The shadows lengthened as the day drew to a close, but the light of understanding remained bright. It was a light that would guide me through the darkest hours of my reign, a beacon in the storm. The lessons of the past were not just memories but living truths that shaped every decision I made. They were the roots of the tree that would bear the fruit of a just and thoughtful rule. Live. The silence of the study was a companion that never left me, even in the midst of the clamor of the court. It was a reminder of the place where the soul finds its rest. The journey of the mind is long, but it is the only journey that truly matters. The body may age and fade, but the wisdom gained in those quiet hours endures. It is the only legacy that survives the passing of time. The words written on those scrolls are still here, waiting to be read by those who seek the same truth. The light of the lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, but the words remained clear and true. The study was a sanctuary, a place where the path from the quiet study to the throne was paved not with gold, but with the heavy, unyielding stones of duty. I remember the day the summons came, a letter sealed with the crimson wax of the state, delivered by a messenger whose face was pale with the weight of the news. My adoptive father, Antoninus Pius, had passed away, leaving the vast machinery of the empire in need of a new hand to guide its gears. The transition was not a sudden shock, but a slowly inevitable tide that had been rising for years, pulling me from the shore of private life into the deep waters of public rule. I stood in the atrium of the palace, looking at the statues of my ancestors, feeling the cool marble beneath my fingertips as if seeking a solid ground that might not exist. The air inside the house was still, holding the scent of beeswax and dried lavender, a stark contrast to the chaos that awaited outside the walls. I knew that the boy who once studied rhetoric in the shadow of the Colosseum was gone, replaced by a man who would have to hold the fate of millions in his hands. The morning of my accession was gray and misty, the sky hanging low over the city like a heavy woolen cloak. I walked through the streets of Rome, not in a chariot, but on foot, moving slowly among the people who would soon call me emperor. The crowd was silent at first, a sea of faces turning toward me with a mixture of awe and apprehension. I saw the wariness in their eyes, the lines etched by hard labor and uncertain harvests, and I felt a profound responsibility settle upon my shoulders. The noise of the city was a constant hum, the clash of wheels on stone, the haggling of merchants, the distant cry of a gull, all blending into a single, unending sound of life. I paused to speak with a baker whose hands were dusted with flour. Listening to his concerns about the price of grain, and in that simple exchange, I understood the true nature of my new role. It was not about glory or power, but about the steady, often invisible work of keeping the world turning. My first act as emperor was to share the burden with my friend, Lucius Verus, a decision that surprised many, but felt natural to me. The empire was too vast for one man to carry alone, and the weight of the crown would have crushed a single spine. We ruled together, a dual heart beating for the same body, dividing the territories and the responsibilities between us. Lucius took the eastern provinces, where the sun blazed hot, and the wars were fought against distant enemies, while I remained in the north, guarding the frontiers against the tribes that pressed against the borders. The arrangement was not perfect, and there were moments of friction, but the underlying bond of our friendship held us together. We wrote to each other often, sharing news of the seasons, the health of our families, and the slow, grinding work of administration. The letters were written by candlelight, the ink drying slowly on the papyrus as the wind rattled the shutters. The years of peace were short, and the storms of war began to gather on the horizon with terrifying speed. The Marcomanni and other Germanic tribes had grown restless, their numbers swelling as they sought new lands to conquer. The northern frontier, once a quiet line of forts and watchtowers, became a place of constant tension and bloodshed. I prepared myself for the campaign, not with the enthusiasm of a young soldier seeking glory, but with the grim determination of a man who knows that the cost of peace is often paid in blood. I reviewed the legions, walking the ranks, and looking into the eyes of the men who would follow me into the dark. Their faces were hard and weathered, their armor scarred by previous battles, and I saw in them the reflection of my own resolve. The camp was a city of tents and wooden palisades, a temporary world built to withstand the elements and the enemy. The winter of 171 AD was particularly harsh, the snow falling in thick, silent sheets that buried the landscape in white. I sat in my tent, the fire crackling in the small brazier, watching the flames dance against the canvas walls. The cold seeped through the layers of wool and leather, a constant reminder of the fragility of human life in the face of nature. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful sound that echoed through the valley, carrying the voices of the spirits of the dead. I thought of the philosophers I had studied, their words offering a strange comfort in the midst of the chaos. They spoke of the universe as a single, living organism live, where every part was connected to the whole, and where even the smallest event was part of a greater design. This perspective did not remove the pain of war, but it gave it a context, a place within the grand tapestry of existence. One specific fact about the legions stationed on the Danube during this time is that they were often forced to drink water from the river that had been contaminated by the dead bodies of horses and men. Yet they held their lines with a discipline that bordered on the supernatural. The soldiers did not complain, for they knew that their duty was to hold the line, no matter the cost. I saw this discipline in their eyes, a steady, unblinking gaze that reflected a deep acceptance of their fate. They were the guardians of the empire, the wall that stood between civilization and the chaos of the wild. Their loyalty was not born of fear, but of a profound sense of purpose that transcended their own survival. The campaign that followed was long and arduous, a slow march through the frozen forests and the muddy plains of the north. I moved with the army, sharing their hardships and their dangers, sleeping on the hard ground and eating the same rations as the lowest soldier. The journey was a test of endurance, a trial of the spirit that stripped away all pretense and left only the essential truth of the human condition. I learned to appreciate the simple things, the warmth of a fire, the taste of clean water, the comfort of a dry cloak. These small pleasures became precious, valued more than any title or crown. The landscape changed as we moved, the trees growing taller and denser, the sky turning a pale, watery blue. The silence of the forest was profound, broken only by the crunch of snow underfoot and the distant call of a bird. In the midst of this war, I found time to write, to record my thoughts and reflections in the quiet hours of the night. The pages were filled with the ink of my own hand, the words forming slowly as I sought to understand the nature of virtue and the fleeting nature of life. The writing was not for publication, but for myself, a way to keep my mind clear and my spirit steady in the face of the chaos. I wrote of the importance of living in the present moment, of accepting what cannot be changed, and of finding peace in the midst of turmoil. The words were simple, but they carried a weight that sustained me through the darkest nights. They were a beacon of light in the darkness, a reminder that even in the midst of war, there is a center of calm that cannot be disturbed. The diplomatic gatherings at Carnuntum were a testament to the complexity of the empire, a place where the leaders of the Germanic tribes came to negotiate with the representatives of Rome. Live. The hall was filled with the sounds of many languages, the clatter of armor, and the murmur of conversations that would determine the fate of nations. I sat at the head of the table, listening to the arguments and the pleas, trying to find a path that would lead to peace. The faces of the tribal leaders were stern and unyielding, their eyes reflecting a deep suspicion of the Roman way of life. Yet, beneath the surface, there was a shared desire for stability, a common ground that could be built upon. The negotiations were long and difficult, but they were necessary, for the cost of war was too high for either side to bear. As the years passed, the war became a part of my life, a constant companion that walked beside me through the seasons. The snow melted into mud, the mud hardened into dust, and the dust was swept away by the wind, only to be replaced by new snow. The cycle of the seasons continued, indifferent to the struggles of men. Yet within that cycle, there was a rhythm that could be followed, I learned to move with the rhythm, to accept the changes of the world as they came, and to find peace in the flow of time. The crown remained heavy on my head, but it no longer felt like a burden. It was a tool, a means to an end, a way to serve the greater good of the empire. The light of the fire in the tent flickered, casting long shadows on the canvas walls. The wind outside had died down, leaving a silence that was deep and profound. I closed the book of my thoughts, the pages warm from my hands, and lay back on the bed of furs. The camp was quiet, the only sound the breathing of the men and the distant howl of a wolf. I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a calm that came from knowing that I had done my duty, that I had held the line, and that I had remained true to my principles. The night was long, but it was not without its beauty, for in the darkness the stars shone with a brilliance that was almost painful. Live. They were a reminder of the vastness of the universe, of the smallness of human life, and of the enduring power of the human spirit to endure and thrive. The fire has burned down to embers in the tent. The wind outside carries the scent of damp earth and distant pine, a cold breath against the canvas that it does not disturb, only reminds. Here, in the quiet hours before dawn, the weight of the crown feels less like gold and more like a stone worn smooth by the river of time. I listen to the breathing of the camp, a rhythmic tide that mirrors the pulse within my own chest. There is no need for words in this stillness, only the acknowledgement of the present moment, the simple fact of being alive while the world sleeps. The silence is not empty. It is full of the unspoken thoughts that guide a life. I am not the emperor in this moment, but a man seeking the center of my own soul, finding peace in the shadow of the legionaries who rest around me. The years that followed were defined by the long, slow grind of the northern frontier. I spent much of my later life leading campaigns from a military headquarters that moved with the seasons, never truly settling, always watching the horizon where the known world met the unknown. The conflict stretched from the year 166 until my final breath, a period of relentless pressure that tested the limits of the empire and the endurance of the soul. Major Germanic and Sarmatian tribes, including the Marcomanni, the Quadi, and the Isages, sought to cross the great river that marked our boundary. They pressed against the Danube, a wide and cold barrier that separated the ordered cities of Rome from the vast, untamed lands of the north. Their presence was a constant reminder of the fragility of civilization, a whisper of chaos that demanded constant vigilance. I walked the lines of the fortifications, feeling the rough stone beneath my boots, listening to the wind that swept across the frozen plains. The air was sharp with the smell of wood smoke and the metallic tang of winter frost. My days were filled with the administration of war, the weighing of supplies, the listening to reports from scouts who rode hard through the snow. I faced the immense pressure of these wars, yet I managed these struggles with a calm demeanor, often retreating into my own mind to find peace amidst the chaos of battle. The conflicts required my constant presence on the dangerous borders, far from the warmth of the Italian sun and the familiar streets of the capital. I viewed my role not as a privilege, but as a heavy burden that I must carry with grace and humility, a task assigned by fate that could not be refused. The Marcomanni tribe was positioned directly opposite the city of Vindobona along the middle Danube frontier, their proximity making them a primary target for Roman attention. The Quadi faced the area near the lands that would later be called Budapest, while the Ayaziges held the territories further to the east. The geopolitical landscape along this middle Danube frontier was complex and dangerous, a patchwork of alliances and enmities that shifted with the seasons. Roman forces struggled to maintain control over such a vast and exposed border region, where the lines of supply were long, and the enemy was often invisible until the moment of attack. The fighting took place along the course of the river itself, a muddy and violent struggle that claimed many lives on both sides, the light in a Roman military tent during the winter and of the year 170 was soft and steady. A single oil lamp burned on a small wooden table, casting long shadows against the canvas walls. The air inside smelled of beeswax, damp wool, and the faint scent of ink from a writing tablet. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen plains, a low and mournful sound that seemed to echo the thoughts of the men inside. Ooh. The cold seeped through the layers of fur and wool, settling into the bones, yet the mind could remain warm if focused on the right things. I sat by the flame, the wax dripping slowly onto the wooden surface, and wrote my thoughts on duty and mortality. The words flowed from a place of quiet observation, a record of the struggle to remain human in the face of inhuman violence. The personal cost of this time was heavy, measured in the loss of many children, a common tragedy in the ancient world that tested the resilience of even the most stoic individuals. My wife Faustina shared this life of public duty and private sorrow, navigating the challenges of ruling a vast empire alongside me. We endured the grief of losing our offspring, a pain that cut deep and left a silence in the home that no amount of imperial grandeur could fill. Despite these personal hardships, I continued to write my private meditations, finding in the act of writing a way to order the chaos of the world. The couple shared a life filled with both duty and sorrow, bound together by the weight of the crown and the shared experience of loss. The empire faced not only the threat of war, but also the devastation of the plague. The Antonine plague swept through the lands, causing widespread death and social disruption that weakened the population and strained the resources available for the war effort. Rebellions in northern Italy and Egypt further complicated the already difficult political situation, forcing me to balance military command with the administration of a fractured state. The combination of military command and philosophical introspection made this reign a unique chapter in Roman history, a time when the sword and the pen were wielded with equal care. The stability of the frontier was preserved through years of relentless campaigning, a testament to the endurance of the legions and the will of the emperor. The conflict resulted in a Roman victory, yet the plans to annex Sarmatia and Marcomannia were abandoned. Due to the cost of continued warfare, the empire chose stability over expansion, recognizing the limits of its power at that time. This decision reflected the immense logistical challenges of holding territory so far from Rome, where the lines of communication were long and the winter was severe. The wars involved major Germanic and Sarmatian tribes, and their coordinated attacks tested the resilience of the Roman military machine to its limits. The emperor spent much of his later years leading campaigns from his military headquarters, writing his famous meditations while encamped in these distant and cold lands. The legacy of this period was one of endurance. Rather than territorial expansion, a lesson in the value of preservation over conquest. A surprising fact from that time is that the Roman army utilized a system of wooden tablets coated in wax for their daily administrative records, which were then scraped clean and reused, a practice that allowed for the rapid turnover of information in a world without paper. This efficiency in communication helped manage the vast logistics of the frontier, ensuring that orders could be sent and received with a speed that surprised the enemy. The wax tablets were carried by messengers who rode hard through the snow, their boots crunching on the frozen ground, live, delivering the words that would shape the course of the war. The sound of the wax being scraped was a familiar one in the headquarters, a rhythmic scratching that marked the passage of time and the movement of armies. The campaign against the Germans was ultimately concluded by my son, Commodus, marking the end of an era defined by my personal leadership. The peace I sought was only partially realized by my successors, for the wars ended with my death, and the stability of the frontier remained a fragile thing. My death likely occurred at Sirmium or Vindobona, ending a reign characterized by wisdom and restraint. The end of my life marked the beginning of Commodus's sole rule over the empire, a shift that would bring its own challenges and uncertainties. The light in the tent faded as the oil ran low and the shadows grew longer, merging with the darkness outside. The wind continued to howl, a constant companion to the end of a long life. My legacy remained one of a philosopher king who governed with a focus on justice and the common good above all else. I left behind a body of work that continued to inspire leaders and thinkers for centuries after my physical departure from the world. The establishment of the chairs of philosophy in Athens ensured that the intellectual traditions of Greece would continue to flourish within the Roman Empire. The 4 chairs represented a synthesis of the major schools of thought, reflecting an inclusive approach to wisdom that valued the truth wherever it was found. This institutional support allowed philosophy to thrive even as live. The political landscape shifted beneath the feet of the emperors, a quiet victory for the mind over the sword. The letters to Fronto provide additional context for my early intellectual development and my deep emotional responses to reading. The joy and shame I felt upon reading Aristo of Chios reveal a man deeply engaged with the ethical implications of his studies. These early experiences laid the groundwork for the mature reflections found in the Meditations, a record of a life lived in accordance with nature and reason. The historical facts surrounding my life and works are well documented, though some details remain uncertain or debated by modern scholars. The absence of specific treaty terms from the year 175 leaves some questions about the final resolution of the conflicts unanswered, a gap in the record that time has not filled. The combination of military command and philosophical introspection makes this reign a unique chapter in Roman history. My life serves as a testament to the possibility of maintaining inner peace amidst external turmoil. The meditations remain an enduring source of comfort and guidance for those who seek to understand the path of Stoicism. The quiet dignity of my approach to leadership and life continues to inspire admiration centuries later. The historical record stands as a testament to my enduring influence on Western thought and culture, a legacy that outlasts the stone walls of the fortresses and the frozen rivers of the frontier. The fire in the tent has finally gone out, leaving only the faint glow of the embers. The wind outside has softened to a whisper, and the camp is silent, save for the rhythmic breathing of the sleeping soldiers. The long day of war is done, and the night brings its own kind of peace. The transition from the loud demands of the forum to the quiet solitude of the tent marked the true beginning of my inner work. I learned that the noise of the world is often a distraction from the only voice that matters, the one speaking within. My writing became a tool for maintaining order, a way to keep the chaos of the camp at bay. I rejected the dramatic flair of the orators who sought to sway the crowds with their thunderous speeches. Instead, I chose a quiet, persistent voice that spoke only to myself. These words were never meant for the eyes of others or for the public record. They were a private journal of self-improvement, a conversation between my soul and my duty. This lack of an audience allowed me to develop a unique and intimate way of seeing. I wrote in the third person about myself, creating a sense of objective distance. This technique helped me analyze my actions without the interference of ego or pride. I could see the man Marcus as if he were a stranger walking through the fields. The influences extended far beyond the books I read in the library. They included the daily realities of administering an empire on the brink of collapse. I learned to see the world through the lens of universal reason and natural law. The artistic development of my thought was a gradual process of refinement over many decades. I began with the formal exercises of rhetoric that filled the classrooms of my youth. I ended with the raw honesty of the journals I kept in the cold of the frontier. The shift from public speaker to private philosopher marked significant change in how I expressed my life. I valued truth over beauty, yet this pursuit created a distinct aesthetic of its own. The clarity of my expression stands as a testament to the rigorous discipline of the mind. My work remains a model of how philosophy can be expressed through simple and direct language. The legacy lies in the enduring power of honest self-reflection. The candlelight flickered gently against the rough hewn stone walls of the quiet study in Carnuntum. A single oil lamp cast long, soft shadows across the wooden desk where the emperor wrote. The air smelled faintly of beeswax and the dry parchment of the scrolls stacked neatly nearby. Outside the small window, the wind whispered through the tall grass of the Danube Valley. The sound was rhythmic and steady, like the breathing of a sleeping child. Dust motes danced in the warm glow of the flame, moving slowly in the still air. The inkwell sat open, its dark liquid reflecting the small firelight with a deep, glossy sheen. A quill pen lay across a sheet of unfinished paper, its tip still wet with fresh ink. The silence of the room was profound, broken only by the distant, muffled sounds of the camp. The heavy wooden shutters were closed tight against the chill of the night. The boy who was born in Rome would one day rule the vast territories with wisdom and justice. He prepared himself for the burdens of leadership through years of disciplined study and reflection. The journey began in the quiet rooms of the family home, where he first learned to read and write. The walls of that home were filled with the voices of philosophers and the images of great men. He absorbed the lessons of his childhood and carried them forward into the challenges of adulthood. The foundation laid in those early years supported him when he faced the storms of war. He later married the daughter of the emperor Antoninus Pius, deepening his ties to the imperial circle. This connection placed him within the highest echelons of Roman society from his earliest days. The letters to Fronto provide context for his early intellectual development and his deep emotional responses. The joy and shame he felt upon reading Aristo of Chios reveal a man deeply engaged with ethics. These early experiences laid the groundwork for the mature reflections found in the journals. The historical facts surrounding his life are well documented, though some details remain uncertain. The absence of specific treaty terms from 175 AD leaves some questions about the final resolution. The campaign against the Germans was ultimately concluded by his son, marking the end of an era. The combination of military command and philosophical introspection makes his reign unique. His life serves as a testament to the possibility of maintaining inner peace amidst external turmoil. The quiet dignity of his approach to leadership continues to inspire admiration centuries later. In 171 AD, I celebrated my 50th birthday at the Danube frontier, a decade into a reign defined by constant threats. The harsh conditions of military life stripped away the superficialities of courtly art and rhetoric. I found beauty in the simplicity of duty and the endurance of the human spirit. I personally received delegations from Germanic tribes at the legionary base at Carnuntum. While accepting their horses and livestock, I denied their request for market access. I feared that Marcomanni spies might infiltrate the empire through such trade. These diplomatic encounters reinforced my belief in the importance of order and the dangers of chaos. My writing style became a tool for maintaining this order within my own soul. I rejected the dramatic flair of contemporary oratory in favor of a quiet, persistent voice. The journals were never intended for publication, serving instead as a private exercise. This lack of audience allowed me to develop a unique and intimate artistic voice. I wrote in the third person about myself, creating a sense of objective observation, the technique of self. Distancing helped me analyze my own actions without the interference of ego. My influences extended beyond philosophy to life, include the daily realities of imperial administration. I learned to see the world through the lens of universal reason and natural law. The artistic development of my thought was a gradual process of refinement over many decades. I began with the formal exercises of rhetoric and ended with the raw honesty of my journals. And the transition from public speaker to private philosopher marked a significant shift in my creative output. I valued truth over beauty, yet my pursuit of truth created a distinct aesthetic of its own. The clarity of my expression stands as a testament to my rigorous intellectual discipline. The light of a late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of a quiet study in Rome, illuminating dust motes that danced slowly in the still air. A large wooden desk stood in the center of the room, its surface worn smooth by the hands of many scholars who had worked there before. Upon the desk lay an open scroll of papyrus, its edges slightly frayed from years of careful handling and frequent reading. The ink on the page was dark and clear, recording thoughts on the nature of virtue and the fleeting nature of human life. Beside the scroll rested a small oil lamp, its flame steady and untroubled by any draught in the room. The walls were lined with shelves filled with rows of clay tablets and leather-bound volumes, each containing the wisdom of the ages. A single bronze statue of a philosopher stood in the corner, its expression serene and thoughtful as it gazed out toward the distant hills. The air smelled faintly of cedar wood and old paper, a scent that evoked a sense of calm and deep contemplation. Outside the window, the city moved on with its usual bustle, but within this room, time seemed to stand still. The silence was not empty, but full of the quiet presence of those who had sought truth in this very space. A soft breeze rustled the leaves of a potted olive tree that sat near the window, adding a gentle sound to the peaceful atmosphere. The room felt like a sanctuary where the mind could rest. My style evolved through a constant dialogue with the great Greek and Roman thinkers of antiquity. I adopted a concise and direct prose style that avoided the ornate flourishes common in my era. The technique of my writing relied on short, declarative sentences that conveyed complex ethical ideas with clarity. My influences included the earlier Stoics, like Epictetus, whose lectures I studied with great diligence. The journals reflect a synthesis of Greek philosophy and Roman practicality in their structural composition. I wrote in Greek rather than Latin, choosing the language of the philosophical tradition I admired most. This choice allowed me to express my thoughts, did live, with a nuance that Latin sometimes could not capture. My artistic development was less about visual representation and more about the architecture of the mind. I constructed my thoughts like a fortress, building walls of logic to protect my inner citadel. The rhythm of my prose mimics the steady march of a soldier on the frontier. I served as a commander during the Marcomannic Wars from 166 to 180 AD, a period that deeply influenced my reflective tone. The establishment of the chairs of philosophy in Athens ensured that the intellectual traditions of Greece would continue to flourish. The 4 chairs represented a synthesis of the major schools of thought, reflecting my inclusive approach to wisdom. This institutional support allowed philosophy to thrive even as the political landscape shifted beneath the feet of the emperors. The Marcomannic Wars ended with my death, and the peace I sought was only partially realized by my successors. The legacy of my writings endures long after the battles have faded into the mists of history. His life serves as a testament to the possibility of maintaining inner peace amidst external turmoil. The Meditations remain an enduring source of comfort and guidance for those who seek to understand. The Stoic path. The historical record stands as a testament to his enduring influence on Western thought and culture. The fighting took place along the course of the great river that marked the edge of the known world. This wide, dark water flowed through the cold north, separating the orderly legions from the vast, untamed lands beyond, the tribes that lived there. The Marcomanni and the Quadi stood like a wall of wind and stone against the empire. They were not a single enemy, but a gathering of many, a storm that moved with a terrible, coordinated purpose. I spent years watching the horizon, where the river met the sky, waiting for the first sign of their movement. The ground here was hard and unforgiving, the soil frozen deep beneath the winter snow. Our soldiers marched through the mud and the ice, their boots heavy with the weight of armor and the burden of a long war. It was a struggle to hold the line, to keep the border from slipping into chaos. The logistical nightmare of feeding and clothing an army in such a desolate place was a constant, grinding pressure. We won battles, yes, but the cost was measured in the silence of empty camps and the slow erosion of our strength. The dream of expanding further east, of annexing the lands of the Sarmatians, faded into the mist. It became clear that the empire could not hold what it could not feed. The decision to return to the old borders was not a defeat, but a recognition of limits. We held the line, and that was enough. The years of campaigning wore down the spirit as much as the body, a slow attrition that left deep marks on the mind. The air inside the tent grew thick with the scent of damp wool and the faint, metallic tang of old blood. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen plains, a sound that never truly ceased, only changed its pitch with the turning of the seasons. I remember the smell of the plague that swept through the camps and the cities alike. It was a scent of sickness and decay, a heavy, cloying odor that seemed to hang in the air long after the dead were buried. The Antonine plague moved through the empire like a shadow, bringing death to the young and the old, to the soldier and the senator. It weakened the population and strained the resources we needed for the war. The numbers of the fallen were so great that the earth seemed unable to receive them all. I walked through the streets of the garrison towns and saw the empty houses, the shops shuttered, the silence where there should have been the noise of life, the rebellion in northern Italy, and the unrest in Egypt added to the chaos, fracturing the state from within. I had to balance the sword and the pen, leading the legions while trying to hold the fractured pieces of the empire together. It was a time of immense difficulty, a period where the very foundations of the world seemed to tremble. Yet the empire held its ground. The stability of the frontier was preserved through years of relentless, weary campaigning. The legacy of this time was not one of glory, but of endurance, of a people who refused to break under the weight of the storm. The light in a Roman military tent during the winter of the year 170 was soft and steady. A single oil lamp burned on a small wooden table, casting long, dancing shadows against the canvas walls. The air inside smelled of beeswax, damp wool, and the faint, sharp scent of ink from a writing tablet. Outside, the wind howled across the frozen plains of the Danube, but inside there was a pocket of warmth, a small island of stillness in a sea of noise. The flame flickered gently, illuminating the rough texture of the canvas and the grain of the wooden table. A simple bronze bowl sat nearby, filled with water that had grown cold. The silence of the tent was a heavy thing, filled with the unspoken thoughts of a man who had seen too much. The shadows stretched and contracted with the movement of the flame, creating a slow, rhythmic pulse that matched the beating of the heart. The leather of the journal lay open on the table, its pages waiting for the next thought, the next observation. The ink was dark and wet, a small pool of potential in the dim light. The warmth of the lamp reached out to touch the hands, a small comfort in the vast cold of the north. The plague did not discriminate, taking the strong and the weak with an equal, indifferent hand. It moved through the ranks, leaving a trail of silence and empty beds. I saw men who had stood tall against the barbarians fall to a fever that no sword could fight. The hospitals were full, the air thick with the sound of coughing and the moans of the dying. It was a time of great sorrow, a period where the future seemed to vanish into a fog of death. The resources of the empire were stretched to the breaking point, the treasury drained by the cost of war and the care of the sick. The social fabric of the world began to fray, the bonds of community tested by the sheer scale of the loss. I wrote in my journal, trying to find a way to make sense of it all, to find a thread of meaning in the chaos. The stoic belief in accepting what cannot be changed became a lifeline, a way to navigate the storm without losing one's mind. I viewed death not as a tragedy, but as a natural part of the universal order, a return to the earth from which we came. It was a difficult lesson to learn, one that required a constant, deliberate effort of the will. The calm and reasoned tone of my thoughts was a shield against the panic that threatened to overwhelm. I watched the world fall apart and tried to hold on to the things that were true, the things that did not change, live. The plague was a reminder of the fragility of life, of how quickly the world could turn from order to chaos. Yet, even in the midst of the suffering, there was a strange, quiet beauty in the way the human spirit endured. A specific fact about the plague is that it is now believed to have been caused by a strain of smallpox that traveled along the trade routes from the east, carried by returning soldiers and merchants. This disease swept through the empire with a speed that terrified the people, killing perhaps 1/3 of the population in some areas. The mortality rate was so high that entire villages were wiped out, leaving the fields untilled and the roads empty. The impact on the economy and the military was profound, weakening the empire at a time when it needed strength the most. The plague changed the way people thought about life and death, forcing a reevaluation of what mattered in a world that could end so suddenly. It was a turning point in history, a moment when the ancient world began to shift towards a new era. The memory of the plague remained in the collective consciousness of the people, a shadow that lingered long after the disease had passed. It was a time of great loss, but also a time of great resilience, as the survivors found a way to rebuild and move forward. The lessons learned from the plague would shape the future of the empire, influencing the way it dealt with disease and disaster for centuries to come. The final years of my life were spent in quiet contemplation rather than in the clamor of court politics. The wars that had occupied much of my later years continued to shape the borders of the empire, but the focus had shifted from expansion to survival. The specific outcomes of these conflicts were complex and varied across different regions of the frontier, but the overall result was a preservation of the status quo. The personal philosophy of the emperor remained a constant source of guidance for those who studied his words, a beacon of reason in a world of uncertainty. The meditations served as a private manual for living a good life regardless of external circumstances, a record of the thoughts that kept me sane. This work has survived the passage of centuries to inspire readers in many different eras of human history, a testament to the power of the human spirit to endure and thrive. The legacy of this period was one of endurance rather than territorial expansion, a story of a man who held the line against the odds. The empire remained intact, but was forever changed by the strain of continuous warfare and the scourge of the plague. The stability of the frontier was preserved through years of relentless campaigning, a testament to the resilience of the legions and the people they protected. The candlelight flickered gently against the rough stone walls of a quiet study in the Roman camp. A heavy wooden desk stood near the window, covered with scattered papyrus, scrolls, and a small inkwell. The air smelled faintly of beeswax and the dry dust of the northern plains outside. A simple bronze lamp cast a warm, steady glow over the open pages of a leather-bound journal. The handwriting on the pages was neat and deliberate, formed by a hand accustomed to both sword and pen. The fire has burned low, leaving only the soft glow of embers against the canvas wall. Outside, the wind carries the scent of damp earth and distant pine, a cold breath that does not disturb, only reminds. Here, in the quiet hours before dawn, the weight of the crown feels less like gold and more like a stone worn smooth by the river of time. I listen to the breathing of the camp, a rhythmic tide that mirrors the pulse within my own chest. There is no need for words in this stillness, live. Only the acknowledgement of the present moment, the simple fact of being alive while the world sleeps. The silence is not empty. It is full of the unspoken thoughts that guide a life. I am not the emperor in this moment, but a man seeking the center of his own soul, finding peace in the shadow of the legionaries who rest around me. The final days came not with a roar, but with a slow fading, like the light retreating from the Pannonian hills. I remember the room in Sirmium, or perhaps Vindobona, where the air grew heavy with the scent of beeswax and the dry dust of the northern plains. My hands, once steady enough to hold the sword and the stylus with equal ease, now trembled slightly as I reached for the inkwell. The silence of the room echoed the silence of the stars above, vast and unchanging. The stillness of the moment offered a profound sense of reassurance to all who entered its sphere. The room held the memory of a life well lived, a life dedicated to the highest ideals of human conduct. The quietude of the space invited the listener to close their eyes and drift into a peaceful slumber. The gentle light and the soft sounds of the night created a perfect environment for rest and reflection. The scene faded slowly into the darkness, leaving only the warmth of the memory behind. My son, Commodus, assumed the rule shortly after I departed. The transition was abrupt and signaled the beginning of a long period of internal conflict and external pressure. The empire he inherited was a vessel of peace, yet he steered it toward the storm. Historians often view this moment as the closing chapter of a great era of relative peace and prosperity. The virtues attributed to me stood in stark contrast to the actions of my successor, creating a lasting narrative of lost potential. No specific virtues were recorded for my relatives, which further isolated my own reputation as a singular figure of moral strength. The wars fought during my reign were bloody and prolonged, though the exact outcomes remain somewhat obscure in the historical record. These conflicts drained the treasury and weakened the legions, yet my personal conduct remained steadfast throughout the turmoil. The book I wrote in those quiet hours remained unknown to the wider world for nearly 2 centuries. After my death, the first recorded mention of this text occurred in 364 CE by the orator Themistius, who noted its existence without quoting it directly. For many years, the manuscript circulated quietly among scholars and monks, preserving the thoughts of a dying emperor. It was not until the Renaissance that the work, There I Did Live, gained widespread attention and influenced a new generation of thinkers. The text offered a timeless guide to self-discipline and rational thought, resonating with readers across different centuries. Modern scholars continue to analyze the Meditations for insights into ancient philosophy and the human condition. The book serves as a reminder that even an emperor must struggle with doubt, fear, and the burden of leadership. Its enduring popularity suggests that the internal life holds more value than external achievements. The legacy of my reign rests primarily on the ability to maintain integrity while facing immense political and military challenges. I am remembered not for the treaties signed or the battles won, but for the consistency of character. A quiet room in a Roman villa, illuminated by the soft glow of oil lamps, holds the weight of centuries. The walls are adorned with faded frescoes depicting scenes of nature and myth, their colors muted by the passage of time. A wooden desk sits near the window, scattered with papyrus scrolls and a small inkwell. The air is still, filled only with the faint scent of beeswax and dried lavender. Outside, the wind gently through the olive trees, casting long shadows across the stone floor. This space once held the thoughts of a man who sought peace in a world of chaos. The silence here is profound, offering a sanctuary for reflection and calm. It is a place where the noise of the empire fades away, leaving only the quiet rhythm of breathing and the turning of pages. The room feels timeless, as if the emperor might return at any moment to continue his work. Live. The light shifts slowly, marking the passage of hours without urgency or haste. The modern significance of my life lies in the enduring relevance as a symbol of ethical leadership and personal resilience. My life continues to inspire individuals who seek to balance duty with inner peace. The meditations remain a staple in courses on philosophy, psychology, and leadership, bridging the gap between ancient wisdom and modern challenges. My story reminds us that true strength comes from within, regardless of external circumstances. The legacy of my reign is not defined by the territories conquered, but by the principles upheld. I demonstrated that a ruler could be both powerful and humble, ambitious and content. My example encourages others to face adversity with grace and to find meaning in the daily struggles of life. The memory of my final years serves as a reminder of the human capacity for resilience and reflection. The critical reception of my life has evolved from a focus on military campaigns to an appreciation of moral philosophy. Contemporary historians often contrast my stoic demeanor with the excesses of later emperors, reinforcing the status as a model ruler. The uncertainty surrounding the specific details of my final days does little to diminish the impact of my life's work. My death in 180 AD remains a pivotal moment in Roman history, marking the shift from a golden age to a period of decline. The calm and reasoned tone of my thoughts reflected the Stoic belief in accepting what cannot be changed. I viewed death not as a tragedy, but as a natural part of the universal order. My final days were likely spent in quiet contemplation rather than in the clamor of court politics. The emperor faced his end with the same dignity he had shown throughout the long and arduous reign. My death was a significant event that reshaped the political landscape of the Roman world. The wars that had occupied much of the later years continued to shape the borders of the empire. The specific outcomes of these conflicts were complex and varied across different regions of the frontier. Yet the personal philosophy of the emperor remained a constant source of guidance for those who studied the words. The meditations served as a private manual for living a good life regardless of external circumstances. This work has survived the passage of centuries to inspire readers in many different eras of human history. The legacy of my life thus extends far beyond the boundaries of my own lifetime and reign. My influence on Western thought remains profound and enduring even in the modern age. The quiet strength of my character continues to resonate with those who seek wisdom in difficult times. The memory of my final years serves as a reminder of the human capacity for resilience and reflection. The candlelight flickered gently against the rough stone walls of a quiet study in the Roman camp. A heavy wooden desk stood near the window, covered with scattered papyrus scrolls and a small inkwell. The air smelled faintly of beeswax and the dry dust of the northern plains. Outside, a simple bronze lamp cast a warm, steady glow over the open pages of a leather-bound journal. The handwriting on the pages was neat and deliberate, formed by a hand accustomed to both sword and pen. Outside the window, the wind moved softly through the tall grass of the Pannonian landscape. The distant sound of a campfire crackled in the night, blending The fire has burned down to embers in the tent, leaving only the scent of damp earth and distant pine. The wind outside carries a cold breath against the canvas that does not disturb, only reminds of the vastness beyond. Here, in the quiet hours before dawn, the weight of the crown feels less like gold and more like a stone worn smooth by the river of time. I listen to the breathing of the camp, a rhythmic tide that mirrors the pulse within my own chest. There is no need for words in this stillness. Live. Only the acknowledgement of the present moment, the simple fact of being alive while the world sleeps. The silence is not empty. It is full of the unspoken thoughts that guide a life. I am not the emperor in this moment, but a man seeking the center of his own soul, finding peace in the shadow of the legionaries who rest around me. When I left this world in the year 180, the transition was abrupt and heavy with the weight of what was to come. My son took the throne, and the stability of the empire began to fray like old rope under a sudden strain. The era of the 5 good emperors ended with my final breath, and a long period of conflict and uncertainty followed. Historians would later call this the closing of the Pax Romana, a time when peace and prosperity gave way to internal struggle and external pressure. The virtues I tried to live by stood in stark contrast to the actions of those who followed, creating a story of lost potential that echoes through the ages. The wars I fought were bloody and prolonged, draining the treasury and weakening the legions. Yet my personal conduct remained steadfast throughout the turmoil. No specific virtues were recorded for my relatives, which isolated my own reputation as a singular figure of moral strength. The memory of my final days in Sirmium or Vindobona remains a quiet anchor in the chaotic history of Rome. My private journal, the collection of thoughts I wrote to myself, remained unknown to the wider world for nearly 2 centuries after my death. It was not a book for the public, but a manual for my own soul, written in the quiet of the camp or the stillness of the city. The first recorded mention of this text occurred in 364 by the orator Themistius, who noted its existence without quoting it directly. For many years, the manuscript circulated quietly among scholars and monks. Live, preserving the thoughts of a dying emperor. It was not until the Renaissance that the work gained widespread attention and influenced a new generation of thinkers. The text offered a timeless guide to self, discipline, and rational thought, resonating with readers across different centuries. Modern scholars continue to analyze these pages for insights into ancient philosophy and the human condition. The book serves as a reminder that even an emperor must struggle with doubt, fear, and the burden of leadership. Its enduring popularity suggests that the internal life holds more value than external achievements. A quiet room in a Roman villa, illuminated by the soft glow of oil lamps, holds the weight of centuries. The walls are adorned with faded frescoes depicting scenes of nature and myth. Their colors muted by the passage of time. A wooden desk sits near the window, scattered with papyrus scrolls and a small inkwell. The air is still, filled only with the faint scent of beeswax and dried lavender. Outside, the wind moves gently through the olive trees, casting long shadows across the stone floor. This space once held the thoughts of a man who sought peace in a world of chaos. The silence here is thick with history, a silence that invites the listener to close their eyes and drift into a peaceful slumber. The gentle light and the soft sounds of the night create a perfect environment for rest and reflection. The scene fades slowly into the darkness, leaving only the warmth of the memory behind. The legacy of my life rests primarily on the ability to maintain integrity while facing immense political and military challenges. I am remembered not for the treaties signed or the battles won, but for the consistency of character. My reign ended with my death, yet my philosophical writings ensured my survival in the collective memory of humanity. The critical reception of my life has evolved from a focus on military campaigns to an appreciation of moral philosophy. Contemporary historians often contrast my stoic demeanor with the excesses of later emperors, reinforcing the status of a model ruler. The uncertainty surrounding the specific details of my final days does little to diminish the impact of my life's work. My death in 180 remains a pivotal moment in Roman history, marking the shift from a golden age to a period of decline. The calm and reasoned tone of my thoughts reflected the stoic belief in accepting what cannot be changed. I viewed death not as a tragedy, but as a natural part of the universal order. My final days were likely spent in quiet contemplation rather than in the clamor of court politics. The emperor faced his end with the same dignity shown throughout the long and arduous reign. The death was a significant event that reshaped the political landscape of the Roman world. The wars that had occupied much of the later years continued to shape the borders of the empire. The specific outcomes of these conflicts were complex, and varied across different regions of the frontier. Yet the personal philosophy remained a constant source of guidance for those who studied the words. Live. The meditation served as a private manual for living a good life, regardless of external circumstances. This work has survived the passage of centuries to inspire readers in many different eras of human history. The legacy, thus, extends far beyond the boundaries of the own lifetime and reign. The influence on Western thought remains profound and enduring even in the modern age. The quiet strength of the character continues to resonate with those who seek wisdom in difficult times. The memory of the final years serves as a reminder of the human capacity for resilience and reflection. One surprising fact, often overlooked, is that the original Greek manuscripts of these thoughts were almost entirely lost, surviving only because a single copy was preserved in a monastery in the 9th century, while most other works from that era vanished into dust. This solitary copy became the source for all modern editions, a fragile thread connecting the ancient world to the present. The text offered a timeless guide to self-discipline and rational thought, resonating with readers across different centuries. Modern scholars continue to analyze the meditations for insights into ancient philosophy and the human condition. The book serves as a reminder that even an emperor must struggle with doubt, fear, and the burden of leadership. Its enduring popularity suggests that the internal life of the emperor holds more value than the external achievements. The legacy rests primarily on the ability to maintain integrity while facing immense political and military challenges. The memory of the final years serves as a reminder of the human capacity for resilience and reflection. The quiet of the final days echoes the silence of the stars above, vast and unchanging. The stillness of the moment offered a profound sense of reassurance to all who entered its sphere. The room held the memory of a life well lived, a life dedicated to the highest ideals of human conduct. The quietude of the space invited the listener to close their eyes and drift into a peaceful slumber. The gentle light and the soft sounds of the night created a perfect environment for rest and reflection. The scene faded slowly into the darkness, leaving only the warmth of the memory behind. The work remains a testament to the possibility of inner peace in a world of chaos. The words written in the dark of a northern camp now speak to the light of a modern mind. The journey from the tent to the shelf is complete, and the silence returns.